Definitions. New treatments have improved outcomes for patients with relapsed chronic lymphocytic leukemia, but complete remissions remain uncommon. Venetoclax has a distinct mechanism of action. It targets BCL2, a protein central to the survival of CLL cells. What is BCL2? It's a protein that helps control whether a cell lives or dies by blocking a type of cell death called apoptosis. The gene for BCL2 is found on chromosome 18, and transfer of the BCL2 gene to a different chromosome is seen in many B-cell leukemias and lymphomas. What is Venetoclax? It's a drug used to treat chronic lymphocytic leukemia and small lymphocytic lymphoma in patients who have already received at least one other treatment.
You've been looking at the use of a new agent, adding it to standard therapy in patients who are relapsed or refractory with chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Why were you looking at this particular new agent and what was the outlook? It's been difficult to add to standard therapy up to now, hasn't it?
So the new agent that we've done the trial with is a drug called Venetoclax, formerly known as ABT199. And it's a targeted drug, oral medication taken daily. The target is the protein BCL2. BCL2, as people will know, is crucial for the survival of many blood cells, but particularly for the survival of chronic lymphocytic leukemia cells. So the hypothesis was that if we added Venetoclax in combination with rituximab, that we would get more efficacy than we'd see with Venetoclax alone or rituximab alone in people with relapsed chronic lymphocytic leukemia.
So could you
Applications in medicine. Venetoclax is the first BCL2 inhibitor to enter routine clinical practice. It is an orally bioavailable small molecule that binds BCL2 very specifically, acting as a pharmacologic mimic of the proteins that initiate apoptosis. Venetoclax rapidly induces apoptosis in chronic lymphocytic leukemia cells, which express high levels of BCL2 and rely on it to maintain their survival.
So Venetoclax is a drug that's not yet approved by the FDA for treatment of CLL. There's more and more data that we're hearing about. There's quite a bit of data, I think, that's being reported here at ASH 2015. I know, Dr. Ma, you've had a lot of experience, and you have an abstract that you're updating at this meeting. I wonder if you could comment first on the mechanism of action of Venetoclax, and then perhaps give us a summary of your updated data that you're presenting here.
Right, yeah. So Venetoclax is a BCL2 inhibitor because BCL2 is an important anti-apoptotic protein that's overexpressed in many cancer cells that allow the cancer cells to survive. So by blocking the BCL2, you can induce the apoptosis initiation. And Venetoclax is an orally available selective BCL2 inhibitor that has been studied, previously reported in the relapsed refractory CLL patients that has a very high response rate. In this ASH meeting 2015, there are two interesting studies. One is Venetoclax single agent in 17p deletion CLL patients. That's a relapsed refractory group. So in this phase 2 study, the overall response rate is reported to be 80%, and the complete response rate was 10%. The 12-month progression-free survival was 72%. So you can see that monotherapy with Venetoclax can induce a deep and durable response. And then I'm going to report a updated analysis on our phase 1b study in combination of Venetoclax with rituximab. So this is also in the group of patients with relapsed and refractory CLL. In this group of patients, we have noticed an overall response rate of 86% with a complete response of 47%. And more importantly, 55% of all patients achieve an MRD negative bone marrow response, so very deep response.
Pros and cons. Venetoclax was active at all dose levels. Clinical tumor lysis syndrome occurs in 3 of 56 patients in the dose escalation cohort, with 1 death. The most common adverse reactions, incidence 20%, were neutropenia, diarrhea, upper respiratory tract infection, fatigue, cough, and nausea. Grade 3 or 4 of neutropenia developed in 64% of these patients, and grade 4 neutropenia developed in 31%.
The Venetoclax is probably from the new treatments the most powerful drug we have so far, and the problem with this drug is it's so powerful that when in the first studies patients were treated with the full dose, there were some cases of severe tumor lysis syndrome, meaning the lymph nodes were shrinking so fast and the lymphocytosis count came down so fast that there was a severe kidney damage. And unfortunately, there were even 2 or 3 patients who died because of this kidney damage. And therefore, the new regimen was developed with a slow dose increase of Venetoclax, where we start with 20 milligrams and then every week double the dose until we reach the final dose of 400 milligrams. That means so far within clinical studies for the patients that so it's an oral drug, it's not so simple as, for example, other oral drugs we have right now, because the physicians have to check the blood before the first drug and then 8 hours later if there is already an increase in a kidney value, and therefore that means for the patients they have to be very compliant. They have to drink a lot of water, and they also have to be close to a physician or maybe even to a hospital when they're feeling better.
Issue applied in Ecuador. The FDA recently expanded the approval of Venetoclax to include combination therapy with rituximab for patients with CLL with or without 17p deletion, who have received 1 prior line of therapy. There is a possibility that in a future, patients with lymphocytic leukemia could be used this treatment in our country.
Essentially, we're coming up trying to develop combinations of these new targeted treatments to try to eliminate either in the short term but particularly in the long term leukemia, in this case chronic lymphocytic leukemia. So the overarching purpose of the research aligns with what I've just said. Chronic lymphocytic leukemia is the most common leukemia in Europe and North America. And while many patients have a good prognosis, people who relapse early after our current standard treatments or who don't respond to current standard treatments have a very poor prognosis akin to some of the acute leukemias. So new treatments are very much needed, and there's been significant advances in the last couple of years in this space. One of those advances is this drug Venetoclax, which is a tablet that's taken each day. It's designed specifically to target a key weakness in some blood cancers, in this instance chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and it works, and I'll show you on the next slide how that happens, by telling leukemia cells to drop dead. And they do this by a process that was discovered in research over 50 years ago by apoptosis. And so the idea of this study is to combine this new targeted treatment with another non-chemotherapy drug that's been around for a long time. We know a lot about it, and that's rituximab. So this slide just outlines the mechanism of action of Venetoclax. Now, CLL cells depend for survival on a protein that's within cells called BCL2. It was first discovered about 28 years ago, and its function was discovered 26 years ago and this drug was first generated just on 5 years ago.
Conclusion. Selective targeting of BCL2 with Venetoclax had a manageable safety profile and induced substantial responses in broader population of patients with relapsed or refractory CLL. Therapies, including Venetoclax, will further transform the landscape of treatment for patients with relapsed CLL, particularly those with deletion 17p CLL.
Venetoclax has completely revolutionized the treatment of second-line CLL. There is no doubt the possibility to have limited duration of therapy, and even more, the high obtention of MRD negative disease in the bone marrow, even with or without a complete response by lymph node criteria. It's bringing a lot of hope to our patients. So it's definitely something that everyone is quite excited. I think besides this tumor lysis syndrome kind of myth that are really not really significant when you see the data of the clinical trials and when you really look as everyone does when we really treat this condition. Outside that, I think it's as a combination with Rituxan in the future with other monoclonal antibodies, and even as mentioned with ibrutinib, that they're going to really be more and more present in the treatment for relapsed refractory CLLs, and in the future for sure in the front line.